إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وأحسن الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدث بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار وقال تعالى في القرآن المجيد يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل تعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you into tribes and nations so that you may know one another. Indeed the most honorable in the sight of Allah are those who are the most God conscious. You know, one of the basic principles of our deen is that all human beings are equal. There is no superiority of one race over another, one nation over another, one ethnicity over another, and the only superiority is based on taqwa, on righteousness. And this is a message that was emphasized throughout the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. That, in his farewell khutbah, his final khutbah, he said that inna abakum wahidun wa inna deenakum wahidun, that your father Adam is one and your religion is one. And then there's wala fadda li arabi ala a'jami wa li a'jami ala arabi, that an Arab is not superior to a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab over to an Arab, wa li aswada ala ahmara wa li ahmar ala aswada illa bit taqwa, nor a white over a black, nor a black over a white, except in righteousness. So this is the message of our deen. And this is not a message that was just theoretical, that it was preached, but it wasn't practiced. We live in times where we have countries that pride themselves of being multicultural and everybody's equal. But when you look at the implementation of justice, it's clear that some people are more equal than others. But Islam, it was implemented from the beginning. And since we're in the month of February, which North America has been declared the month of Black History Month, I want to highlight the contribution of Black Muslims to our history. And of course, a short khutbah wouldn't be able to do justice to it. It's just for you to get a taste, so you go and you research more. And to start off with, we go to the time of the Sahaba, the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Of course, the most famous of Sahaba that we all know is Bilal anhu. Bilal, who was the first mu'adhin of Islam, somebody who was guaranteed paradise, one of the early converts, one of the closest companions to the Prophet ﷺ. He was somebody who has a high maqam in our deen, and all the mu'adhins until the end of time are following the footsteps of Bilal. But he wasn't the only. He wasn't the only Sahaba and the early Muslim who accepted Islam. There was many others. For example, when the Sahaba migrated because of the persecution in Makkah, before going to Medina, they went to Abyssinia. And why? Because the ruler of that time, An-Najashi was his title, it wasn't his name. His name, the historian says, Osama of Aksum. He was the ruler of Abyssinia. And he was a Christian king, but he was just. He was righteous. He was sincere. So he, took care of the Sahaba, he protected them, and his heart was pure, so he accepted Islam. And if you look at it, so the first ruler to accept Islam at the time of the Prophet was An-Najashi. Most of the other rulers were arrogant. They didn't accept. But An-Najashi accepted, and he was from Abyssinia. You have also people like Ayman, whose name was Barakah bint Alaba, who was the woman who took care of the Prophet ﷺ after his mother died. And he was so close to her, he said that she is my mother after my mother. You have also Zayd bin Haritha, who was the person appointed to be the general of an army after the Prophet ﷺ would pass away. He appointed him right before he passed away. And the people had doubts about Zayd because he was young. And there was people who were had more experience than him. So the Prophet ﷺ defended Zayd and he said, he is befitting of this leadership. And he said that his father, Zayd ibn Haritha, that he was the most beloved people to me. And his son is the most beloved people to me after him. And that's why he was given the title, Beloved Son of the Beloved. Usama ibn Zayd. And then, of course, as you go through history, it's, pages and pages, you can study. At the time of the Tabi'een, right after the Sahaba, you had people like Ata bin Abi Rabah, who is one of the giant scholars of the Tabi'een. They consider him the first Mufti of Mecca. And later in history, you have people such as Mansa Musa, who is considered the richest person in history, period. Not in Muslim history, in history, from Mali. So this is just, some things to mention. But one thing I want to mention is that, the Quran mentions, very interesting, the psychology of shaitan. When he was asked why did he not prostrate towards Adam alayhi salam, he said, أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِنْهُ خَلَقْتَنِي مِنَ النَّارِ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِنْ طِينٍ. I am better than him, you created me from fire, you created him from clay. If you look, this is the attitude of a racist. Right? I'm better than this person because of my color, because I'm from this country, etc. Shaitan was the first racist. Right? And if anybody has that inside of them, that they're better than somebody because of the color of their skin, because of their nationality, because of their ethnicity, you should know that that person has a quality of shaitan. So racism is haram, haram, haram. And in fact, the person who has racism inside of them, it's kibr. And if you have an ounce of kibr inside of you, you will not enter Jannah. Right? This is also the quality of Pharaoh. Why did he oppress the Bani Israel? Because they're from a different nationality, different ethnicity. Perhaps the greatest manifestation, the most evil manifestation of racism in the past few centuries was the transatlantic slave trade. From the 16th to 17th century, where the Europeans went to West Africa and parts of Africa and enslaved their brothers and sisters there. Inshallah, I'll be touching upon this in a bit in the next part of the khutbah. وَأَقُولُ قَوْلِي هَذَا وَأَسْتَغْفِرُ لِي وَلَكُمْ وَلِسَائِرِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ فَاسْتَغْفِرُوهُ إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله. O you who believe, be those who stand up firm for justice, being witnesses towards mankind, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the transatlantic slave trade, from the 16th to 19th century, where Europeans went to West Africa and they enslaved their brothers and sisters there. And many of the people they enslaved were Muslims. They were Muslims. And one of the things that, at least when I was growing up, it wasn't talked about as much, but maybe now it's better, I don't know. One of the interesting things was when the Europeans engaged in the slave trade, it's not that they didn't meet with resistance. There was mujahideen, there was jihads led against this evil institution. Imam Abdul Qadir of Senegal, in the 18th century, he led a jihad against the slave trade. You have the Wolof of Hispaniola, who led the first revolt against the European slave trade in the Americas, many of them who were Muslim. There's another interesting example, which only came out recently. There was a scholar from West Africa, Umar ibn Said, you could look him up. So he was taken from West Africa and he was enslaved and he was put in, in the US. And like they did with all, they tried to erase his connection to his deen, to his history, to his culture. But he was a scholar. And only recently they found there was an autobiography that he wrote in Arabic. Right? But I want to mention, for this khutbah, one person which I'm sure you all know, and we should always remember him because he's a great example for us on how to stand for justice in the 20th century, and it was Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. Right? It's very important that every Muslim studies his life and his legacy. We can learn a lot from it. So who was he? He was born in 1925. In the US at a time where black people were considered not even humans, they would be lynched in public and people would get away with it. And Malcolm X, his father was an activist, and he spoke out against the racism he saw, but his father was killed. He was killed most likely by the Ku Klux Klan. His mother was put in a mental institute. The system, the country did whatever they could to oppress anybody who spoke out against the injustice that they saw. So, his father being killed, his mother being put in a mental institute, and society constantly telling him that he's less than a human being. Constantly telling him that he's a criminal. Although he was a brilliant human being, but they constantly tried to teach him he was less than human. So he ended up falling into a life of crime. And he ended up in jail at a young age. When he went into jail, he got introduced to a group called the Nation of Islam. Now, the Nation of Islam, they're not Muslim, but they're influenced by some, Islamic thought, and they were calling for the upliftment of black people in the U.S. and the condemnation of the systematic racism that existed in America, in the U.S. So he joined them and he became influenced by them. And this is something that blows my mind when I heard about it. While he was in jail, he wrote a letter to President Truman. President Truman was the U.S. at that time, and he condemned him for his war against Korea. Think about this. He is from the most oppressed class in that country. He's in prison. He doesn't have freedom, and he condemns the most powerful man in the world at that time, the president of the U.S., for his war against Korea. It shows you that he was somebody special. And as the Prophet was asked, Ayyul jihad afdal, what is the greatest form of jihad? He said, Kalimatul haqqin inda sultanin jairin, to speak a word of truth in front of a tyrannical ruler. And that's what he did throughout his life. So he did this, and one thing I want to mention, of course, because he was from the US, and his focus was on the plight of African Americans there, but people tried to limit his legacy to just that. And that's a disservice to him. When you study his life, his legacy, his speeches, it's pretty clear that he spoke out against injustice everywhere he saw it. I just mentioned the example of Korea. He condemned the US for their violence against the Vietnamese in South America and China. He spoke out everywhere he saw it. And one of the things that he tried to do during the end of his life was to collect the plight of black people in the US, or the plight of third world revolutionary movements in other parts of the world, which made him a threat for America at that time. So anyways, he gets out of jail and he becomes very prominent, he becomes world renowned, because he's a very powerful speaker. And I would encourage everybody not to just read about his life, go listen to his speeches. You'll be shocked at how powerful he was and how relevant his talks are even to our time. So he became very prominent, but he eventually realized that the Nation of Islam, the leader whose name was Elijah Muhammad, who claimed to be a prophet, was a charlatan. He was somebody who basically took advantage of women, he was taking money. He was somebody who was a fraud, and he claimed to be a prophet. So Elijah Muhammad Malcolm X left the nation. And he went to the Muslim world and he traveled. He went to Egypt, he went to different parts of the world. He went for the Hajj, he entered into mainstream Islam. He entered into mainstream Islam, and then he came back to the US, and at this time he's known throughout the world. He's famous. And then he's asked on national TV about his travels. And what he said blew my mind. I actually have forgotten my notes, so I'll have to say it from my head, I apologize. But he essentially said, when he's asked about his travels and his conversion to Islam, he said, America needs to study Islam and accept Islam. And I'm paraphrasing. This is the only religion that will erase the root problem of American society. Throughout my travels, I've traveled throughout the Muslim world. I've met people who look white, but Islam has removed the racist attitude from their minds that I see in America. Now, the point I want to make here is he said this almost around 60 years ago. He unapologetically said Islam is the solution to the problem of the West. He gave da'wah unapologetically. We're here 60 years later, and we're scared to talk about Islam. We want to water down Islam, we want to liberalize Islam, we're scared. Islam is this, please accept me. He was there and he gave da'wah unapologetically. Now, Malcolm X, he got killed shortly after. So he was a Muslim for less than a year of his life. But Allah promises, وَالَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَلَنْ يُضِلَّ أَعْمَالُهُمْ. Those who die in the path of Allah never will let their deeds go to waste. One of the things is when Malcolm X converted to Islam, he influenced, remember that guy I mentioned, Elijah Muhammad, who was a leader of the nation, who claimed to be a prophet? He influenced his son, Warith bin Muhammad, to become Muslim. Warisi Muhammad led the biggest mass conversion to Islam in North American history. And thousands or millions of people have become Muslim because of Malcolm X, and many Muslims have become practicing because of this man. But who was he? He wasn't a graduate of Al-Azhar or Medina. He didn't have ijazat. He didn't have social media following. He didn't have millions of dollars of marketing behind him and advocacy. He was somebody who was sincere, and he spoke the truth in front of tyranny. And any time he saw injustice, he spoke it. And look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved his legacy, that he is responsible for the biggest conversion to Islam in North American history. So look at all the resources we have, look at everything we have, what excuse do we have? We need to speak the truth and not be afraid when we see injustice. Right? He spoke the truth whenever he saw it, and by the way, he spoke up for the Palestinians in his lifetime, amongst other oppressed people. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the courage and the tawfiq to speak the truth. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate his ranks and make it amongst the shuhada and the righteous and the salihin. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to speak this deen and to teach this deen in a way that is beloved to him. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع ومن قلب لا يخشى ومن نفس لا تشبع من دعوة استجاب لها آمين. اللهم أسحر على المسلمين في فلسطين مستضعفين في كل مكان يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم واستغفروه ويغفر لكم واتقوه من أنكم ما كل وأقيموا الصلاة.